Alright. Hey, what's up? Hopefully this video works. I haven't done this in a little bit. Took some time off, but was a little bit sick before Corona. It wasn't that. But yeah, been putting together these scouting reports, and last year me and Jackson did, and then Ross later joined me, and we did pretty much every player that I think got drafted or um, has made the NBA from last year's draft. I think we did at least a short scouting report on them, and sort of trying to replicate that this year. Just as a quick aside, actually, I'm just thinking now it would be kind of interesting to go back and look um, how if we missed any guys that ended up making the NBA or playing any NBA minutes that we ended up not being able to cover or forgetting to cover, or whatever the case, in last year's podcast. So I'll check that out. I'll update you guys on that at some point. But yeah, here, so I'll start with a few scouting reports here. I got a little bit less than an hour here. It should be hopefully a little bit quicker since I'm by myself to go through these guys, but we'll see how many I'll be able to cover here. And then uh, all the guys that I covered in this episode at the end, I'll try to rank them all. And then the following episode, the next guys I cover, I'll rank all those guys along with these guys and so forth. And then hopefully by the end of doing all these, I'll kind of have a big board made out, and I'll compare that to my actual quote unquote big board that I have, and see how that lines up. So yeah, that's kind of the process of doing this, covering all these guys and scouting them, and then also creating my big board, my final pre-draft big board. So yeah, starting off here with Tyrese Haliburton. He's been out for a little while. I think maybe early February is when he ended his season. So I've had some time to cover him, and he hasn't had any very recent games or any really recent film to cover. So yeah, Haliburton, he's about 6'5", has pretty long arms. I would estimate about a 6'11" maybe wingspan, which makes me think maybe what 8'7" standing reach or so. His neck is a little bit long, so yeah, probably not quite 8'8", but pretty good measurements even at 6'5". Definitely for the point guard position, but even for two guard and as far as just length, even guarding up to the three possibly in just that regard. Of course, we know about the strength. I'll get to that, but um, the common comparisons among kind of recent players and recent drafts with him. Obviously, we hear a lot about Lonzo Ball and guys like Anthony Melton, kind of these versatile off-ball players that have had, I guess, like um, variable success in the NBA so far. Melton has had a very nice season with Memphis, but was, of course, I believe, like a second round pick or maybe even undrafted. And I think he was a second round pick and didn't really get a lot of playing time prior to kind of breaking out this year after being traded to the Grizzlies. And Lonzo has had also obviously an up and down career. I think most people listening to this relatively familiar with him. So I think kind of a lot of those concerns that those guys had kind of stand for Melton. I'm sorry, for Halburton. I think relative to Melton, he's much more ready as a shooter, especially off the catch, spot up, no dribble jumper. 132 attempts, 71.6 effective field goal percentage over his career at Iowa State, both years combined. 71.6 effective field goal percentage. So most of those are threes, but that's almost 50%. On spot up, no dribble jumper. That's not quite as impressive as 3-point shooting overall, but still, that's very impressive number. And I think maybe one of the higher, if not the highest number among college players on my big board, especially considering having over 130 attempts. So definitely very good touch, and in spot ups, he's definitely very capable, and I think that's a big reason and a good reason to be somewhat confident in him being able to contribute on offense. Of course, shooting is so important nowadays. Um, what was I going to say? I'll say, to be fair, Lonzo Ball in his 1 year in UCLA, not quite 130 attempts, but he had a good number of attempts and shot a very, very good effective field goal percentage on spot of no dribble jumper, if I recall correctly. So, considering Alonzo had a lower free throw percentage in UCLA, but nevertheless, kind of had some struggles up until this year shooting the ball. And Haliburton also has kind of awkward mechanics. And, when he has kind of time and space to set up and get into a shot the way that he wants to, he's been very, very effective, as we see by the numbers. But when he has to hurry a little bit and kind of get it off a little bit quicker, the percentages have gone down considerably. I didn't look up his exact numbers on guarded versus unguarded, but those numbers in synergy are not always exactly accurate. And it's not particularly whether he's being contested with Halburn, but more um, how closely he's being contested and how much he has to kind of hurry that release, which is when he really has some struggles. So we'll see how that shot translates to the NBA, whether he's going to have to rework that. He's definitely made some pretty impressive improvements as a pull-up shooter, shooting off the dribble relative to last season, his freshman year. But, that's still not a shot that he's extremely comfortable with. Um, I don't have his exact pull-up numbers, but I believe he was in the low 30s effective field goal percentage this year, which is not great, definitely, but it's not as horrible as one may think. As we'll go through some of these scouting reports, you guys will see that a lot of these players, particularly younger players, are not going to shoot a very impressive percentage on pull-up jump shots. Especially once you go to higher attempts, there's going to be a few guys like Marcus Howard or somebody like that who could shoot, in the high 40s or even in the 50s effective field goal percentage on pull-ups. But majority of these guys are going to be in the 30s, maybe low 40s effective field goal percentage. And yeah, so what Halburn did as a pull-up shooter this year, especially again in the context and relative to where he was as a freshman, is pretty impressive and somewhat encouraging that maybe he will be able to improve upon his shot and kind of become a more versatile shooter. It's hard to see him ever being like super effective coming off screens unless he makes like huge changes to his mechanics. But nevertheless, also as far as touch, he doesn't have a huge number of free throw attempts. That's kind of a issue with him because again, the strength. Everybody knows the strength with him. I'll get more into it in a second, but yeah. Doesn't get to the free throw line a whole lot, but his free throw percentage has been pretty good. And as a sophomore, 13 out of 29, 44.8% on runners, and career 15 out of 38, 39.4%. Not amazing numbers, but pretty solid on those shots on runners and kind of like flip shots and the floaters and that type of shot. This year, 11 out of 16 at the rim pick and roll ISO spot up. So that's a pretty good percentage actually, but I think the volume only 16 attempts, and considering the role he played for Iowa State, that's a pretty low volume. And when you watch him on film, seeing him drive, he shows some like body control and even some like explosion vertically and stuff like that. As a finisher, good touch again, but yeah, just if there's any contact at all, if there's somebody a defender in his way at all, he really struggles with that, and really more than even just struggles, he really avoids any contact. And he like I'll get into the strength now. Like though he's like to the next level with that, and that's like my big concern with Haliburton. The strength, it's not just like bad; it's like maybe the worst I've seen for a prospect of his magnitude, and it's you know. He's just totally unable to make any sort of impact with his body as far as carving out space or kind of on the defensive end getting in the way of guys or kind of trying to finish through contact. And not only is he not able to do it when he tries, he very rarely ever tries to do it. And I was watching one game where he actually used his body and kind of finished through contact, and I was shocked, and it was great to see. But that's like literally like maybe one play throughout the whole season where he actually, it's probably a little bit more than one, but it's very rare where he'll actually play physical. So it's the strength is really, really low level and extremely concerning for him. And not only the strength on its own, but also the physicality and his willingness to play through contact and kind of toughness and yeah, just aggressive and assertive attacking in the half court is really, really concerning for him. And yeah, it'll definitely be interesting to see how that translates to an NBA. Now, I'll give to his credit somewhat that John Morant is a guy whose strength, physical strength, got criticized in the past pretty heavily, and he's translated to the NBA pretty well. And I think we see with more spacing in the NBA, more kind of open floor game at times, or at least in the half court, there's definitely a lot more kind of space to get downhill and stuff like that. That helped a guy like Morant. But as much as I criticize Morant's strength, I really wonder if Haliburton is either even to another degree. And all that length that I talked about, the wingspan and the standing reach that he has, which is pretty good. I think kind of the strength counteracts a lot of that and kind of cancels out a lot of that. On the defensive end, I think he might be a pretty big mismatch at the NBA level. Maybe some of the smaller point guards, he'll be able to be strong enough to defend, but does he have the quickness for that? I do think his kind of mobility and not to jump around too much here, but his kind of mobility, body control, and ability to contort his body, flexibility and stuff like that is a little bit even underrated at times. But because the strength is so bad, it even limits him in those kind of abilities to some extent. You'll see on the defensive end where he's kind of mirroring a guy, and the guy he's trying to defend kind of gives him just a tiny bump, and it totally takes Haliburton out of the play and just gives up a wide open driving lane or something like that. So any switching he does to the NBA in the NBA level, I think is going to be a pretty big concern. So filling out that frame, guys that come to the NBA, guys come skinny and not kind of physically ready to the NBA all the time, but uh, the kind of place where Haliburton is when it comes to his strength. I really wonder, even in an NBA strength conditioning program, and I'm sure whatever NBA team drafts him will put a lot of work into his body. Just wonder how much stronger will he get, and that'll be definitely a big question for his career going forward. So we'll see. That'll be definitely an interesting development, but definitely kind of watching him and creating this profile for him. That's kind of a big thing that stood out. It's like I mean, obviously I knew about his strength, but just how bad it is, just how bad it is, and like the low level that it's at, is really kind of concerned me. Again, as I've kind of tried to evaluate Haliburton in totality for this profile. But yeah, just to finish up with him is the IQ and feel for the game is of course extremely impressive. You see, I love how he kind of loves to jump in the air for passes, and he'll just like cycle through options, and like he'll see it every single like tiny millisecond moment of the game, like what the exact best play is, and he kind of goes up in the air with the ball, and he's like, weak side. Oh no, the defender moved a few inches to the right. Okay, now the roll man is open. Okay, bang, and that right at the right moment he hits the guy with the bounce pass for an open dunk or whatever. So yeah, that kind of feel for the game and in the moment. Instincts and recognition that he has is really impressive, and you see it of course in the passing, as I said, the creativity he shows as a passer, um, ability to set up teammates, but also on the defensive end, a great jumping, passing lanes, recognizing opposing kind of schemes, kind of seeing plays ahead, not just as a playmaker and passer, but again on the defensive end, can be caught overhelping a bit at times, and of course struggles on ball because of strength, but it's understandable that he kind of overcommits to being this active team defender and using his length and basketball IQ as a team defender because of that, limiting strength as an on-ball defender. Um, so yeah, we'll see how that also translates to the NBA. As in the NBA, he won't be as far as ahead of everybody as far as basketball IQ, and you can't be quite as kind of active and disruptive kind of free safety team defender unless you're like an insane level athlete or something like that. But for most guys, they kind of have to tone that aspect of their game down when they get to the NBA and kind of play a little bit more conservative. So we'll see how much of that translates. But I think maybe if it doesn't translate directly to him being great at putting up huge steals and blocks numbers like Matisse Thybulle or somebody like that, I do think it will translate to other parts of his game. Again, the ball movement, the ability to kind of recognize play right in the perfect moment, the feel for timing he has, which I think is a huge part of basketball and something that sometimes gets underrated or at least not talked about enough. Like people don't realize kind of the rhythm and timing of ball movement and player movement and positioning that some players have and some don't, and Haliburton definitely has that, and I think that's definitely something that makes me somewhat encouraged about him translating to some extent. So I do think he's in many ways very safe, I guess, in that I think because of his basketball IQ and the fact that he is, I don't think he's like an amazing athlete, but he's definitely, you know, uh, passes the NBA trash threshold for athleticism pretty easily. So that combination, that type of guy is usually not going to fail completely and usually going to find a way to contribute. And again, he has the shooting touch, so he provides spacing off ball and that type of thing. But the strength is a really really big weakness, and you got to wonder how limiting it'll be. And then because he probably won't be a star ball handler and kind of primary initiator and stuff like that, you would like to see a little more versatility from his jump shot and for him to be able to, maybe not shoot off movement, but at least be able to get off his shot quicker and kind of be more comfortable when the defense is closing out and is kind of pressuring him to be able to get off his shot in those type of situations a little bit better and with a little bit better efficiency. So yeah, it'll be interesting how it all works out. But yeah, I would say in general, just compared to where I had him on my other big board, and after kind of doing this profile and creating this scouting for Haliburton, I'd say move down on Haliburton a little bit, just because that strength is so concerning, man, and then it'll definitely be interesting to see exactly how it translates. So yeah, I think that's what I got on Haliburton. Let's see if I have anything I want to add. Oh, I'll say one thing about the strength also with the passing. He definitely seems to prefer going to the roll man on passes. His handle is decent. Obviously, he has that great awareness, and he may not have these amazing like crossovers and stuff, but he's pretty good at keeping the ball out of the reach of the defense and not turning it over and stuff like that. But yeah, just as far as reads in the pick and roll, I see him make some skip passes and some like longer distance passes here and there in transition and stuff like that. He's pretty good with outlets and stuff. But I do notice that he definitely prefers to go to the roll man and kind of make that kind of closer distance pass. You don't see as many skips from him, and he doesn't make any execute any really high level skip passes like right off the dribble, like whipping it across the court with his offhand or something like that. So yeah, you gotta wonder maybe the strength kind of comes into play there as well. For the passing, and yeah, I do want to see him become a little bit more comfortable in making those kind of longer distance skip passes in the pick and roll. So yeah, that's something that I thought I would mention here. But yeah, I think that's about all on Halliburton. So yeah, next up we got Aaron Henry from Michigan State. Um, so yeah, Henry is somebody who I've kind of cooled off somewhat over the course of this season. I still think he's a draftable prospect, but a little bit disappointed with how much development he's shown over the course of the year. I definitely think he's improved on his spot up shooting, and just this season in particular, his spot up no dribble jumper, his uh, results on it were really good. He was like one of the best if you just look at effective field goal percentage on spot up no dribble this season only. Over his career, he has 88 attempts, which is fairly low number of attempts, and that's worth noting. And 61.9% spot up no dribble jumper, not quite as good as Halburn, but that's still actually a pretty good percentage. But you got to think about the low volume, and he's another guy who kind of likes to set up a certain way, kind of likes to lean in on his jump shot when he catches, spotting up with his feet set. So yeah, that's kind of a big thing for him. So a lot of the ones he'll take are pretty open and ones where he's really able to set up and set his feet. So yeah, in the situations where he kind of has to get it off quicker and kind of more spontaneous shots, in particular pull-up jump shots. Over his career, 75 attempts, pull-up jump shots in the half court, 31.3 effective field goal percentage, which is not very good. He does shoot 41.3%, 46 at runner attempts, and I think that's where he does really well offensively. I think he really likes to get into the paint and shoot those kind of short mid range, like 12, 14, 15-foot jump shots. He's fairly capable of those, but like jump shots from further out, like even long twos or like 3-point jump shots, and ones where he doesn't have kind of time to set and like kind of get into his jump stop and really set up and get into it. Ones where he has to go like right off the dribble, his kind of process of ball pickup from dribble to pull up jumper is pretty bad, and uh, he's thrown up some pretty wild ones. I had a few clips that I pulled where some really ugly pull up shots from him. So he definitely needs to improve on that, on getting off his shot off quicker and kind of being less deliberate and kind of um, getting away from those awkward kind of leaning in mechanics that he has in the spot up. I mean, they are effective for the open shots that he shoots. As I said, he hits them at a very good rate, but on shots where he's gonna have to get it off quicker, definitely in the NBA at his size, about 6'5", maybe 6'8" wingspan, maybe 8'6" standing reach, I'd estimate. That's guard size at the NBA. He's pretty strong, but uh, definitely a lot more two guard in the NBA. But his skill set is more in line with a three forward type. Maybe not quite a power forward or anything like that, but you know, definitely kind of in that group of guys. There's several of these guys in pretty much every draft class, but um, you know, guys that are kind of like 6'5", maybe 6'6", 6'4", that are kind of more threes at the college level at least, and more two guards at the NBA because of their size. And you always gotta wonder how those guys are going to exactly translate between those two positions. So yeah, what he does do well on offense, he does pretty well getting in the paint and kind of being crafty with pivots and jump stops and pump fakes. Really good with his offhand, really comfortable with his right hand. Sometimes goes a little bit too much to his right hand even, and in game situations, you'd rather you finish with your left hand and show that you have that right hand and miss. But yeah, the fact that he is so comfortable with his offhand is definitely encouraging for his future, at least. Can finish off either foot, uses kind of extensions well to finish over the defense, uses frame, establishing a position against smaller defender, can play in the post a little bit, has a good nose for putbacks. So definitely a physical guy and has some craft to him, and very unselfish player as well. Had a really good assist to usage rate stat that my buddy Ben Rubin invented a few years back. Uh, you know, um, Kind of to show that how often a guy will pass. Obviously, if you have higher usage and you have the ball in your hands more, it's easier to create assists like that. So, kind of showing guys that are able to create a lot of assists despite not having the ball in their hands all the time. And Henry did pretty well in that stat as a freshman, and I believe as a sophomore as well. So, pretty good finding guys in the weak side and stuff like that. But yeah, just as far as shooting, he's definitely going to have to get better. Even with hitting those high percentages on spot ups, teams still weren't very kind of like fearful of him behind the arc. Often are helped off of him, and made his drives and those attacks on the paint a lot more difficult by closing out kind of softly on him. And Henry himself still tentative on a lot of those shots when he's not able to totally set up the way he wants to. Tendency to pass up open looks or kind of hesitate. So yeah, um, that's kind of still an issue for him on offensively. I wonder. He's going to be almost 21 years old at the time of the draft, so gotta wonder if he has the offensive and kind of athletic profile to really be a impactful player in the NBA. especially from the two guard position. Would have to think he would be, on the lower end among NBA two guards as far as offensive ability overall. Of course, he's very good on the defensive end. I'm not a big proponent of on-ball defense, kind of point of attack, man defense. I've always said that it's um, for overwhelming majority of guys, it's not something they're going to make an impact with one way or the other. As far as defending on ball, you're not really going to make a big positive or negative impact. Most guys are just kind of in a big, um, big group where everybody's about the same as long as they're defending guys. Approximately within their own size range. Obviously, if you throw a 5'10" guy on Joel Embiid, that's going to be, probably a pretty negative impact as an on-ball defender. But for the majority of guys, they're kind of all about the same. But Henry is one of the few guys that I honestly think is an impact on-ball defender. Um, in his 2 seasons with Michigan State, Henry defended 143 field goal attempts in isolation and pick and roll. Opponents shot just 22% on those attempts. So, yeah, that's definitely very impressive. And you could see it in his ability to kind of mirror opponents. Very good getting around screens, getting back in front of guys after getting around screens. Uh, uh, Defending both sides of the screen, I call it, when he's kind of denies a guy going over the screen and forces him away from the screen, but then still gets back in front when the guy denies the screen and goes the other way. Henry's still able to kind of cut off his penetration, kind of force guys down, take away the edge and not allow them to turn the corner. Pretty good shot blocker on ball as well. Good hand placement. Aggressive, uses his body very well. Great balance. Good stance. So, his on ball defense, one of the few guys that I honestly think, even at the NBA level, he may not be, you know, um, an elite NBA on ball defender as a rookie or something like that. But I think even as a rookie and definitely down in, several years down in his career, as he enters kind of his prime. I definitely think if he's able to stick around in the NBA, he could be a legit impact on-ball defender, especially against two NBA two guards, certain wings, and maybe some of the uh, point guards that don't have like elite quickness and stuff like that. You did see like a guy like Anthony Edwards. I thought. Excuse me. I thought Henry did a pretty good job against Edwards overall, but of course, Edwards has that kind of effortless ability to just rise over the top of guys and um, get off these insane shot attempts where he's nearly unstoppable. And you saw like you would think that maybe if Henry was a couple inches taller or had a little bit a longer reach and stuff like that, maybe he could um, contest some of those shots that Edwards hit a little bit better. Who knows? Maybe Edwards would have made them anyway. Because when again, Edwards is one of those guys. When he gets hot, he can make some really, really impressive shots. But some of that um, physical kind of talent that Henry somewhat lacks. Again, you wish he kind of was more 6'7" with a 6'10" wingspan instead of 6'5" with, I don't know, 6'8" wingspan or whatever he's at. Um, yeah, if if he did have those couple of inches, Aaron Henry, I wonder if he would be a little bit more effective against Edwards, and if Edwards wouldn't have went off quite as much against him. Again, to be fair to Henry, a lot of those plays Edwards had were not against Henry, and a lot of them were like in transition and stuff like that also. So. Yeah, but still, there was definitely a few plays where, in that game in particular, and throughout Henry's season with Michigan State, where I felt, with a couple more inches of length and, maybe a little bit more vertical explosion or quickness, he could have done a little bit better. But overall, I do think he's a very effective on-ball defender. Team defense, Michigan State plays a very conservative scheme, especially when it comes to wings. Here Tom Izzo really wants guys to stick with their own guys and kind of not overhelp, not really gamble too much in the passing lanes. Overall, Henry does a solid job. Definitely, executes that scheme very well considering how good of an on-ball defender he is. You'll see some miscommunications on switches with him at times, and I think he could get a little bit better chasing guys away from the ball off screens. I do think some of that is maybe Izzo's system. I'm not quite sure, but I tend to see a lot of that in the Izzo system. Again, because guys are not really helping a lot. They're trying to focus on their own guys. When you're chasing a guy off screens, sometimes they're able to get some separation against you or over you or whatever you want to call it, because your other guy's not going to be helping too much at that moment. When you're getting screened off, and stuff like that. The other, your teammate is not going to help a lot. They're going to kind of stick with their own guy. But I do think Henry could be a little bit better in lock and trail. You saw him give up as a freshman some open looks off screens to Carson Edwards, and this year I forget who it was, but trying to remember. I'm not sure who it was, but yeah, I remember seeing a couple games where he kind of gave up some separation for guys running off screen. Maybe it was Joe Wieskamp or somebody like that. But um, I think that's about all. I'll say, again, going back to just the athletic talent, at times he really loves that jump stop, and you'll see some plays where he's kind of getting downhill, and the defense is kind of coming over to rotate on him as he's going down the driving lane. And you would think a more athletic guy, even with his size and everything, would be able to just explode off 1 or 2 feet and go up and try to finish. Maybe not with a crazy dunk, but at least with a layup or whatever, or try to get contact and draw a foul. But with Henry, in some of those plays, I noticed he's more comfortable kind of going to the jump stop, and he doesn't really have that elite vertical pop and stuff like that. So again, he goes kind of to the jump stop and then kind of pivots around. So missing out on some of those kind of plays athletically is another minor concern offensively. And I do think because of stuff like that, that's why in particular for him. The jump shot is especially necessary, and I'm talking about like pull-up shooting and stuff like that, to be able to hit some of those more difficult, shots, not just wide open spot ups, but shots off the dribble against defenders and stuff like that, is a very important thing for him in his development, and he's gonna really need that if he's able to succeed and kind of stick around in the NBA. Next up, just to go with the Michigan State team, we'll go to Cassius Winston. I think I'll probably finish Winston and Xavier Tillman here. Um, but yeah, with Winston, I won't say he regressed this year, but definitely stagnated somewhat. You got to look at the players that Michigan State lost: Matt McQuaid and Kenny Goins, and Gabe Brown, Rocket Watts, Malik Cole, Thomas Kittier, Marcus Bingham. Excuse me, kind of all to various degrees stepped in for those guys. I think Rocket Watts was really disappointing this year. Obviously a freshman. It's understandable. Sometimes guys will have a tough season, especially smaller guards who depend a lot on shot making. Some of those guys tend to have some struggles early on. But yeah, Watts really disappointed, and Kenny Goins I think was underrated and how big his basketball IQ and ability to stretch the floor and all that stuff was for Michigan State. So I think some of that had definitely had to do with Winston uh, kind of stagnating again. I don't think he regrets, but he definitely didn't really show much improvement from his junior to his senior year, and I think we saw one of the main ways he really kind of was disappointing to me as a senior is his assist percentage, in particular versus top 100 teams. His assist percentage went down 9% from 46 to 37 assist percentage. So yeah, you know, that was definitely somewhat disappointing for me as I was early on somewhat high on Winston and kind of more have him toward the bottom of my top 100 at this point. I will say he's still 22 years old, somewhat younger for a senior, and he's not like you know 27 or 28 where he's totally in his prime and he's done. Just because a guy doesn't improve one season or kind of their development arc flattens for a season or even a couple seasons sometimes, that doesn't mean they won't improve anymore. That's it, they're done, they've plateaued or whatever. That's not necessarily true. There's plenty of examples of guys that have kind of even trailed off in production, and as long as they're young enough, there's still reason to believe that they'll be able to improve in future years and get better. So I don't think this means that Winston is done, but at the same time, looking at his game and just his kind of profile as a player, his archetype or whatever you want to call it, you got to wonder how much does he really have to add. 6'1" maybe in shoes. I've seen like 6'4", 6'5" wingspan for him. Maybe 8'1" standing reach, I guess around there. Again, 22.4 years old on July 1st this year. You know, not the strongest player, great footwork, really uses his kind of hesitations, hang dribbles, changes of directions really well to carve out space. Uh, definitely likes to dribble a lot. A little bit could be blamed for over dribbling at times, but generally unselfish. Definitely has that great vision. If you're open, he'll usually find you and at least try to get you the ball. The passing execution can use some work. Definitely a little bit sloppy with passes, not always great accuracy. Sometimes a little bit too much air on his passes, where defenders are able to recover or kind of get a hand on passes and stuff like that. And decision making is not as great as you want it to be, considering the lack of physical talent that I mentioned. um, but even with that, hazy shot selection and tendency to get a little bit over ambitious with passes at times, still a really great shot maker. For example, last 2 years combined, I talked about how 33% is not so bad for pull up jumpers. Well, Cassius Winston, 215 attempts, 46.5% effective field goal percentage on pull-up jumpers. Also, 133 runner attempts, 48.9, almost 49% effective field goal percentage on runners. Extremely impressive on that high of a rate. And then, of course, spot ups, 110 attempts, 69.5 effective field goal percentage. Not quite the 71.6 that Tyrese Haliburton had, but nevertheless, very impressive shooter. 23 off-screen three-pointers made in the 2 years combined. Also, that may not seem like a huge number, but that's actually pretty damn good. So really versatile shot maker, and just a great jump shooter. Kind of has that awkward mechanics where he kind of pauses in the middle of his release, so kind of holds it near his chest and then gets it out. But really effective, and has kind of quickened his release, I feel like, this year in particular, and has made it a little bit more fluid, a little bit more single motion release, and has shown to be capable of getting it off against defenders. At times there's a few plays I remember where because it's kind of low and he's not the tallest guy and stuff like that, he's had it blocked or heavily contested and stuff like that. But for the most part, definitely really good shot maker. And I do think people talk about the passing often, but I honestly think the shooting versatility and shot making that he shows is his kind of biggest value, and especially at the NBA level, and how valued pull-up jump shooting is nowadays. I think that's the reason I would consider adding him to my team and kind of bring him in. And we'll see, maybe he has one of these Devontae Graham seasons where he just goes off on pull-up jumpers and just hits all these crazy, jump shots, and which obviously makes the defense kind of focusing on him, and he's able to kind of take advantage of his craft as a ball handler, and his footwork, his fundamental stuff, and creation and all that, and you know obviously opening up passing lanes for himself and all of that. Again, the tendency to over dribble, and the Michigan State offense definitely has some tendency to inflate assist numbers, especially for their primary initiators. So maybe he's not quite as great as a passer as some make it out to be. I remember Tom Izzo called him like the best passer since Magic Johnson or something like that, or at least the best Michigan State passer since Magic Johnson. I don't know if I'm quite there. There have been some very good passers in the Michigan State teams throughout the years, but he's definitely, again, if you're open, he'll get it to you. He definitely has very good vision. Again, he likes to dribble the ball a lot, but he's not particularly selfish and, everything like that. But yeah, if he's not like an incredible, really high level shooter at the NBA level, some guys are able to translate it, some guys are not. We'll see what Winston does. But yeah, if he doesn't fully translate that incredible shooting to the next level, it's going to be really tough for him to succeed because he's skinny, he's not strong, he's not quick, he's not athletic. In the college level with kind of his craftiness and he'll get some calls to go his way because of his reputation. At this point of his career as a senior, he was able to be a decent finisher and get to the rim at a decent rate, but I'm really skeptical that very much of that translates to the NBA level unless he becomes, this incredible pull-up shooter where teams just have to play really up on him, and then he could take advantage more of his um, little tricks and all the little crafty dribble moves and hesitations and changes of pace and all of that. Defensively, I'll say he's almost guaranteed to be a negative defender at the NBA level. The question is how much. I would probably guess he's going to be a pretty big negative. So I mean that's another reason why I probably wouldn't be looking to draft Winston until the late second, if not even further down than that. But I will say he's improved defensively. Like as a sophomore, he was a disaster defensively. Like he was just even at the college level, he was problematic. But since then he's gotten better, where he at least mostly executes the scheme. Unless he has a really difficult matchup or something like that, he's able to keep his guy in front and kind of do his best to contest. We'll take some plays off on the defensive end at times, or not play physical enough, kind of get bullied a little bit at times. Understandable with the heavy usage role he plays for Michigan State and kind of, again, doing so much for them on the offensive end. Hopefully he's plays with more intensity on the defensive end at the NBA level, as he'll likely play a smaller role. But if he was a really capable high level defensive player like a Trey Jones or somebody like that, I'd be a lot higher on him. This is a kind of a 3-and-D point guard because of that shooting that I talked about. But with the defensive problems, even if he becomes, he really is able to translate all of that shooting ability that he has to the next level. I feel like a lot of that will be counteracted by his defensive deficiencies, unfortunately. So, yeah, that's kind of the problem with him, and what kind of makes him not quite as valuable or interesting as somebody like maybe Fred Van Vliet or somebody like that, where he could have warranted a comparison to a guy like that if he was a better defensive player, but he's not, unfortunately. So, yeah, the shooting is still impressive enough. It's such a big deal nowadays at the NBA level that you still have to keep Winston in mind, and he's not just a shooter. Compared to like a guy like Marcus Howard or somebody, or Miles Power, or a guy like that. I feel like he's maybe a little bit below Howard, but in that conversation of he's that level of shooter and kind of that group of guys in, as a shooter, but he could actually run the point guard position and set guys up, and has good court vision and understanding of where guys are and stuff like that, at least in the offensive end. But defensively, I feel like he's just as, or maybe to some extent, even more problematic than some of those guys. So, yeah, that kind of unfortunately takes away from a lot of the intrigue I would hypothetically have for Winston. Uh, Let me take a breath here. See, this is where I wish I had somebody else with me here, that I could, kind of relax and get my thoughts together while somebody else talks. Definitely want to get people on. Hey, if you guys want to get on with me, I'm not like choosing guests where you have to be some genius expert to be on with me. Pretty much anybody. If I know you at all, if I don't know you at all, I'm sorry. I probably don't want to get somebody just randomly on here. But if I know you at all, you're watching this right now, you want to get on with me, feel free to hit me up on Twitter, or even comment on my freaking YouTube videos or whatever. Anyway, uh, next up, Xavier Tillman. 6'7" a quarter, no shoes is my estimate for his height. Maybe 7'1" ish wingspan. So that would give him, I don't know, 8'11" standing reach. I don't know. What do you guys think? Comment what you think about these measurements. A lot of these I kind of, obviously I looked at their official quote unquote measurements from college and stuff, but the wingspans and standing reaches especially are not really always out there. So I kind of come up with the top of off the top of my head. So let me know what you guys think. Some of these maybe I'm a little bit off on. Some of these I'm definitely not the best at guessing standing reaches and wingspans and everything. But probably around 260 pounds. Really, really strong player. And even as an undersized five, I think he would be at least strength wise really capable of matching up with the majority of players in the NBA. Especially a couple of years from now, as he works on his body further and gets some of that old man strength, quote unquote, which he already has a lot of, by the way. But even as he gets older, he should continue to get stronger, as everybody almost does. Um, at least in that capacity, he definitely has that covered, and that's kind of his big contribution and how he's able to use that functionally, whether as a defensive player or inside. But also, I would say is a pretty smart player, and of course, applying that strength takes some basketball instincts and IQ, but in other ways as well. Really, this year played a lot out of the short roll for Michigan State, and I felt like that was some of their best offense this year when he kind of set a screen for Winston and kind of get out in the Winston maybe would get trapped and Tillman would get out in that open kind of elbow area or between the free throw line and the 3 point line. Is it called the slot? It might be called the slot. I'm not super familiar with coaching terminology, but yeah, kind of in that short roll area, and then kind of going downhill. Maybe taking a dribble or you know um, drawing the defense, collapsing defense, and then finding shooters or cutters, and really showed some impressive passing. Obviously with these Michigan State guys like that, Draymond Green, Draymond Green, everybody's gonna say Draymond right away. I think the problem with someone, he's not quite the shooter that Draymond is. Obviously Draymond improved his shooting a good deal even in the NBA, but even at the college level, I think, especially later in his career, Draymond was much, not much, but definitely a better shooter than Tillman is. And I think Tillman in his career, just 29.1 percent, or not a career, I'm sorry, I believe this is the last 2 years combined, 29.1 effective field goal percentage on spot ups, which is pretty problematic, I feel like. And he's definitely going to need to get a lot better at that. He has pretty good touch finishing inside, but definitely like off the dribble finishing and stuff like that. Excuse me. Um, Sorry, covered the camera there, didn't I? Sorry about that. If I did, I'm not sure. I was just grabbing something over here. Didn't mean to do that. Anyway, yeah, with the finishing inside, he could use his strength, and he has actually pretty decent touch as a finisher. But I think at the NBA level, the finishing is gonna be somewhat problematic, being an undersized five, and not very explosive vertically. Is not gonna really get up for lobs or like even dribbling off the short roll and kind of trying to finish on the drive. He's not the best at that. So that kind of, I feel like, as a paint presence offensively, he's not going to really bring as much as you'd like from your center, and he's not kind of a good enough shooter or for your modern day power forward. So offensively, he's gonna have to, I don't really see him becoming a lot more athletic or a lot more capable as a finisher inside. He's not gonna grow taller more than likely. So, you'd really like him to become a much better shooter. And if he's still able to play the five and really, able to be a guy that you could play five out with, that would be make him a really valuable player overall, considering some of his other ability. I'll get into his defense in a little bit, but yeah, right now, just again, he's not quite as much of a offensive paint presence as you'd like to be at the NBA level, and he's not a very good shooter either. As good of a passing player he's turned out to be this year, especially I'm a little bit questionable about how much impact he could make in the NBA, and I feel like teams will defend him, play him for the pass, and all of a sudden now what does he do? And somebody's waiting inside for him. He can't really finish over bigger guys inside that well. Maybe he could use his strength, but again, at the NBA level, that's not going to be as big of an advantage. So, he's really going to have to shoot the ball, and so far he hasn't really done that so well. I will say to his credit, one thing I did like besides the improvement in passing, and I think they kind of have to do with each other with each other. Excuse me. Is the ball handling, and I've seen him throw some really nice like quick crossovers, getting around guys and stuff like that. So that ball handling improvements he showed this year, I think not only helped his passing, but just overall is an encouraging sign for further skill development possibly. But yeah, just the shooting touch is not where I want it to be. As a sophomore, I believe he shot in the low 70s, and there was some kind of excitement about his upside as a shooter, and people were hoping that free throw percentage was indicative of a continual growth as a jump shooter and of his shooting touch in general. But this year now it's back down. I believe he was like in the mid 60s as a free throw shooter, unfortunately. Post ups were 21% of all of his possessions this year. And, I don't see NBA teams giving it to Xavier Tillman in the post very often at all. So you could take away all of those pretty much possessions. So really, I feel like his offense, unfortunately, I'm fairly skeptical of it translating to the NBA level very much. Now, on the defensive end, he's definitely a very smart player, and um, I wouldn't say he has a elite defensive IQ, but very active, high motor, and again, has that functional strength. Has a tendency at times to kind of chase the ball a little bit too much and try to constantly make an impact on the ball, whether uh, uh, blocking shots or deflecting passes and stuff like that. It's funny, I talked about how conservative the Michigan State offense is, and it is on the perimeter, but they really try to funnel you to the inside to their bigs, and really take advantage of their bigs' ability to protect the rim. And I think that's why you see in general Michigan State bigs almost every season do really well in stats like BPM, and always have really impressive block percentage and stuff like that. And I think to some extent Tillman was definitely a beneficiary of that on the defensive end of again Michigan State Tom Izzo's systems kind of tendency to really utilize their big man and really uh, get their big man to be active and allow them to really again kind of chase the ball and kind of be a really important part and the big anchor of their defense. And Tillman definitely. It's not just that easy that they tell you to do that and you go and do it, but it's impressive that he took advantage of that, no doubt, and he's definitely a very impressive impact defensive player at the college level. But I do think he'll make some mistakes here and there as well. He's not like maybe elite defensive IQ as some people sometimes say about him. Again, maybe it shows here. I'm a little bit lower on him maybe than some people are. But nevertheless, yeah, impressive defender. You'll see him defending both dunker spots at times, kind of zoning up between both guys, and has really quick hand eye. Great job, kind of stripping guys. Has improved a lot defending in space as well. Where he was even like early on in his sophomore year, I remember him getting killed by a guy. I believe it was maybe like Jalen Hands or maybe Kobe White or something like that. Early in the year, where they just totally, would put him in pick and roll several times over and just blow by him and really create lots of separation. But as that season continued, and especially this year, I feel like he's become a very competent, even switch defender at the college level. Um, he's not super explosive like vertically, as far as like getting a lot of air and like really jumping really high, but you'll see some pretty impressive ability to move backwards and jump quickly off of one foot while moving backwards and having momentum, taking him one way but then jumping the other way, and still having enough lift to kind of contest the shot or even get a block and stuff like that. See him quickly churning his hips in the air and stuff like that. I thought he did a very good job of that on some of the plays that I watched. Yeah, overall, yeah, I think he. Sorry for that. Yes, I think overall a very impressive defender. Um, Definitely at the college level, and I do think a lot of that will translate to the NBA level. Even as being smaller, we see smaller bigs at the NBA level succeeding more and more often. He's not as athletic or as mobile as somebody like Bama Adebayo or John Collins, even. But he has much better defensive instincts, at least coming out of NCAA, than either of those guys. And yeah, I do think he'll be able to stick around in the NBA and succeed to some extent. But I think overall, I see him more as a kind of a backup five, a good backup five, but still a backup more than likely. And those guys is just tough to give a very strong draft spot to most of those guys nowadays, just because they're not very difficult to find. So even a guy like Tillman, unless he really makes a big jump in the shooting, and I think there's uh, enough reason to uh, uh, I won't say believe, but kind of be somewhat optimistic about that. That there's a little bit more upside to Tillman maybe than I've given him credit for here. But you know, nevertheless, he's still more than likely kind of a decent backup five at the NBA level. Not third string, but probably second string. And it's hard for me to place a guy like that, like in the first round conversation, even in a weaker draft like this one. So yeah, unfortunately, I have to go. There's still a few profiles. I'll try to get to them sometime, probably tomorrow or maybe later on tonight. I have several guys here. As usual, I thought I'd be quicker with these, but of course, I talk way too much. I'll have A the Sumno just to preview it for you guys real quick. Aaron Neesmith, Peyton Pritchard, Chris Duarte from Oregon, also Sam Merrill, Precious Achua, and Nate Hinton that I set up. So I'll try to get those over next, day or two or however long it takes. But just for now, since I promised I'll rank all these guys, I'll say from these four, I think it's fairly easy to rank just these four. Is number one Haliburton, number two Xavier Tillman. I'll say it's actually I have some reservations about Henry and Winston, but I'll still go Aaron Henry because he is younger and I like that defensive upside. I'll go with Henry third, and I'll go with Cassius Winston fourth. But man, it's close between those two. I might change my mind, but for now, I'll say Henry then Winston. So Haliburton, Tillman, Henry, Winston, out of these four guys, and I'll get more videos to you guys as soon as possible on the other prospects. All right, later.